This year marks the 30th anniversary of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, the 90-minute-long anthology video starring the King of Pop and Joe Pesci. It's one of the few times when a music video has been translated into a popular video game, and not just one video game, but a few. Turn back now if you don't know what happens next, because today we're going to be spoiling the story and endings of both the arcade, Genesis, and Master System versions of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. This is Game Over, the early years. While I'm sure it sounded strange at first, Sega turning Michael Jackson's Moonwalker into a video game makes perfect sense. The 1988 film was composed of a bunch of different music videos in disparate segments, with most lending themselves well to the 16-bit video game formula. Sega didn't need to shoehorn Michael Jackson into a bunch of confusing scenarios, because that work was already done for them. If you've played Moonwalker, then chances are it's on the Genesis. This was certainly the most popular and well-received game of the bunch, and a great jumping-off point. It stars Michael Jackson doing everything in his power to save a bunch of kids from the evil Mr. Big, who is abducting children in order to drug them and turn them into slaves. Honestly, this sounds like a job for the police, but when the King of Pop has those killer dance moves and the ability to throw magic stars, who on earth is going to stand in his way? The action kicks off in Club 30, the bar that was made famous in the Smooth Criminal music video. This leads him outside, where he'll rescue a bunch of kids around the club, and then to a parking lot where the armed guards are waiting for him. Of course, this all leads to our hero getting himself into a sticky situation with a bunch of zombies in a graveyard, reminding us of MJ's video for Thriller. After surviving the cemetery, the zombies and armed guards flood a cave in hopes of trapping our hero. But don't worry, Michael Jackson turns into a robot and kills everybody in sight. This leads us to the enemy's secret base, which is where Mr. Big is supposedly hiding. If you shoot enough enemies, the whole place will go up in flames, but the game's not over yet. You may have killed all the henchmen and rescued the children, but there's still one final challenge waiting for us. It's time to switch to a first-person pilot's point of view and shoot down Mr. Big's spaceship. Here's what happens next. Wait, that's it? That's all they're gonna give us? Well, at least there's a dance routine during the credits, but even that's over in less than 30 seconds. This is a bad ending. Now, around the time Moonwalker was wowing early Genesis adopters, Michael Jackson was also doing his thing in 8 bits. The Sega Master System version looks a little worse, and some of the levels are a bit simplified, but this is a surprisingly faithful adaptation of the 16-bit game. We see MJ going through most of the same stages in hopes of killing the bad guys and saving the children. The big difference is the final showdown with Mr. Big, which ditches the lame first-person space stuff in favor of a more manageable third-person shoot-'em-up against Mr. Big's mountain base. Here's what happens next. This is yet another short ending, but at least it's better than the Genesis version. And this dance routine at the end lasts a lot longer. It's still a disappointing ending, but I think that we're headed in the right direction. Now, despite coming out around the same time, the arcade version of Moonwalker has very little in common with the home console releases. It's more of an overhead beat-em-up starring 3 different versions of Michael Jackson. This was Sega's chance to show off what they could do with the property without the constraints of the 8 and 16-bit game consoles. So, here's hoping that translates to a more interesting ending. This arcade game doesn't start out at Club 30 like every other version, but instead sends us straight into the caverns. His goal is to still beat up the bad guys and rescue the children, but this time around it's Bubbles the chimpanzee who gives Michael the ability to turn into a robot. This leads to the amusement park, which eventually turns into the Club 30 setting from the Smooth Criminal music video. MJ hits the city streets next, which ultimately ends with him fighting Mr. Big in a floating tank. He wins, of course, but the fight is far from done. Our next stop is the graveyard, which is overflowing with both guards and zombies. Mr. Big shows up once again, only to this time have a massive contraption that seems to be shooting ghosts at our hero. It's a little confusing. Now, after dealing with that baffling fight, MJ turns his sights to the enemy's underground base, which just so happens to look exactly like the first stage. But don't be fooled, because we're only one long elevator ride away from learning the truth. It all ends with our hero taking on Mr. Big in an 8-legged spider suit. Here's what happens next. Yeah, this isn't a great ending, but it's a big step up from either of those other Sega games. We get a cool looking explosion and a few paragraphs to help wrap up the story. Honestly, I'm not sure what Sega could have done to make a satisfying conclusion, especially given the source material. The movie's known for a lot of things, but having an emotionally satisfying conclusion is not one of them. The reason you play these games is not for the ending, but rather to hear the awesome chiptunes version of Bad and Billie Jean. And isn't that enough? Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, the early years. So here's the question I have for you. What band do you think should star in their own video game? It could be new or old, but personally I would turn the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night into an old school beat 'em up. What would you pick? Let me know in the comments below. In other news, I have a whole week lined up full of shooters and rhythm games, plus something called Neon the Ninja. If that sounds appealing to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,